Axure Quicktip. How to build a one page in Axure with a scrolling behavior, active state, and a header that is flexible in less than 25 minutes. Now in Axure Quicktip. As usual, we are starting with an empty page. I'm starting with creating elements for the header. The upper part of the header will remain, so the height of this element won't change. That's my fixed part. I'll add a second part that will disappear. This is often used in mobile applications or mobile websites. For example, content that is not every time needed then disappears when the user starts to scroll. That's a behavior I want to simulate here. The next element is the navigation. With this first element, I have to do some more things. I adjust the size of it in width and height. As we have 1000 pixel width, I'm setting it to 333, and now I'm labeling it. So just calling it section 1 that I have an area to click on. For the style, I set the border to none and use a bigger font so that we can see this element better, and we're later on using it. Next is a technique that we are using in Axure Quicktip number 1, a video that I will link for you. I used this selection group for enabling the active state easier. Now configuring mouse over and selected state, and what you see here, using a fill color to draw a line under the element if it's selected. That's also a tip I shared with you in another video that's linked below. That's Axure Quicktip number 1. There I explain this in detail. What I'm doing now is just labeling the element and configuring the regular on-click behavior. So if a user is clicking on this element, it's setting itself selected in combination with this selection group. Only one element at a time will be selected. Just copying it so that we have 3 buttons here and labeling them properly. 1, 2, 3 and section 1, 2, 3. Now a little bit of alignment so that we have a better looking prototype here. The next things are the titles for these separate sections. These will be used later on as anchors to scroll to, so that's why I have to label them also. And as you can see here, I'm using their kind of a method that's always the same, starting with this S and H for shape. I'm using this, for example, RP for repeater, DP for dynamic panel. That's handy if we have to search for things later on. And what you've seen here, as Axure gets quite slow when I'm recording the screen, I use this sending down to the bottom via this line in the Y command. And as we want to have a very long page, we have to add a line or another widget very far away from the original content, so that the page is getting long enough if we're looking at it in the browser. Now I'm showing you just that I put in some example data for demonstration purposes of this demo. So not that important, but as you can see this, and as I always do, I'm not scrolling, I'm not cheating here, just showing you a regular speed how this works. And if you want to have other topics, if you have an idea, if you have a challenge for me, maybe post it in the comments below here on YouTube, or tell me a topic via email at post@thomasjagstedt.de. If you have there something that is worth sharing, just give me a hint what you want to achieve with Axure. I'll think about that and try to come up with a solution in a video in future. As you can see, I'm just putting here some values, quite standard, as we often have it in current websites. Just some text blocks, and here, for example, an area maybe for an email sign up, or for example a slideshow or a little gallery. And the last thing, again, a picture here in the third section, so we have content for this page. Now we're starting with making this markup interactive. At first I select all the elements for the header, convert it to a dynamic panel to achieve that this dynamic panel and the navigation and the header is sticky. I use this pin to browser function, set it to center, to top, that it always will stick there, and make sure that the page is also centered. So if we preview this, the page already is able to scroll and the header is sticky. If we just wanted to have a sticky header, then we would be done. But as you have seen in the start, we want to achieve a little bit more. So first thing I want to make interactive is that when I start scrolling, the header is not just sticky, it also collapses. There I noticed that the header is not labeled, so I quickly do this and jump into the first state of this header. And what I'm doing now is I'm adding an element where I just save values that I often need. For example, in this case here, I use it for the header size if the header is collapsed. This value will be needed often in the future. So here I just create this element, and when the page is loaded, I'll write the size of these elements here. If we make the dynamic panel smaller, then this element is out of sight and it doesn't disturb anyone. What I'm doing now is just calculating the height of the collapsed header. So I'm setting on this fn for function. That's always elements in my mockups that store values, or they can be called and do some things. Here I add the fixed header and the first element of the navigation to get here the height. So what I'm doing now is looking for height of widget, and instead of having this, I'm using this first local variable, it's called L1, and then add there the height of the second local variable. So we are adding the height of the fixed part of the header and the height of the navigation to achieve here that we don't have to calculate this every time we need it. It's stored when the mockup is started, when we go in preview, and if you later on change, for example, the size of the header elements, it will change dynamically. So if you make adjustments to the prototype after discussing with colleagues or with clients, you don't have to recalculate. The mockup does it on its own. What you see here is that I'm adding a second function. That's just storing the current scroll height. So on this label will always be written what position the page is currently at. This I will use later on for having this active state and to have the proper scroll behavior. Just making a note here that this is permanently set and that I know what this case is for when I use the mockup later on. So what we want to do at first, we want to change the header. As soon as we scroll on this function we defined seconds ago, will be written a number that is bigger than 0, so the header is about to collapse. What we use then is just the hide mechanism with a slide up and add a little bit of animation here so that it's looking a little bit nicer and doesn't not just flicker. And what we have to keep in mind is that the size of the dynamic panel also changes. And here's the first time we can use the function where we store the height of the repeater. Instead of calculating it here separately, we just use this variable and know that we have future safe. So if we change the height of the header in any time, we will have the right value here. What you've seen here is a problem Axure sometimes has. It has this else if topic. I'll make a video about this later on. Here it was important to change it to if instead of else if. And what I'm doing now quickly is just the opposite way around. So if the user has scrolled to the top, then the value of these first of the helper will be 0, and that's why I changed back the height and did show the variable part of the repeater. And as you can see, I scroll up, it disappears, I scroll down, and it's back again. So first thing done, the sticky header has a flexible part that collapses when we scroll. And first I want to address a minor bug we had, as the elements are 333 pixels wide and we have a 1000 pixel wide header. There's kind of a little space in between these elements, so I changed the background of the dynamic panel to white, and the content won't shine through. What I'm doing now is just if I click on an element in the navigation bar, the corresponding section is scrolled to. So just copying over the scrolling behavior and just change it to the proper section. If you use here this copying, you don't have to do a lot. You just change which section to scroll to, and that's all. For example, if you have these three, it's done very fast. And now let's have a look at it. And what you can see is what we had to expect. Axure just scrolls the element to the top of the page and does not care about our sticky header. So we have to do a little tweak. What we are doing now is that we, before scrolling, move the target element that we use as anchor upwards and afterwards back down again. And the amount we have to use it is exactly that what we stored in our variable, size of this collapsed header. So have here this function handy and just have to move this element. As said, after scrolling we move it farther south, and before we move it up to the north of the page. So here just have to change it to -L1 and the element will move. Then we scroll and then will be moved back down again. That's so fast that we can't see it. As you can see here now, I'm scrolling there, not even a flicker is visible. Everything works as expected now. For the other parts, I have to do this also. So as you can see here, I'm using always the stored value. I don't know if you counted it, but I think in this prototype we are using 20 times this calculated value. So it's very handy to have here this local variable. And maybe you're asking yourself why I'm not using the variable Axure provides. These are global variables that are meant to be used if we have to store values that can be read or changed from different pages of the prototype. And as they are said that to make Axure and prototypes of Axure slower, I always try to use as less of the global variables as possible. And with this local variable here, this elements, I call them fn elements, it's quite fast, and you can see that the scrolling behavior is now as we want it. If you want to have more space in between, you just would have to add a value on this LVAR1 you've seen seconds before. If you add there, for example, 15, then you have 15 pixels of separation between the header and the title. The element on top right was just for demonstration purposes, and as we don't need it anymore, I hide it. And now we're thinking about the scrolling behavior. If I scroll the page, I want to have these different sections active. This first section of the menu bar should be active if everything above the second title label is inside. So if I compare the current scroll position I stored in this function, compare it with the height of the second title, and then subtract from this the height of the dynamic panel. Again, we're using here the variable. Then we have the area where we want to have the first element of the navigation selected. So that's sometimes a bug in Axure. If we have to use multiple of these dialogues, then the active one is sometimes in the background, just moved around a little bit and found it. So now we're setting the first section as active. Here we had a little issue with this else if state, change it to if, and then everything is fine. I'll make a video on the topic when to use if and when to use else later on. For the second section, I have to change just the combination here, just if it's a value that is higher, then the second section will be active. And again, copying it and adjusting it for this third section. So everything that is above the third section makes the third element of the navigation active. That's working because we used this selection group in the beginning. Then it's enough just to set one element as active, and the prototype automatically sets all the other menu elements as not active. As you can see here now, we have defined these three rules. If the page is above the title number 2, then the first element is active. If I scroll down, the second gets active, and so on. As you can see here now, the first is active, now the second is active, and if I scroll even further down, the third one is active. In combination with these click events here, you see that there's a flicker of the active state. And that's because we used in the beginning this set selected on click. This on click is fired directly, and then while scrolling, the active state will be switched. So now we can erase this, add all the elements here. Of course, if you know that you want to use this scrolling behavior, you don't have to put it in at first. I just wanted to show here that the standard way of achieving this sometimes is not the best way. And as you can see now, we have no flicker, and the scrolling works in combination with the active state. And if I scroll to the top, then the header is expanded. The only thing I forgot here was to set an initial selected state. That's what I'm doing now. And what you can see here is the result we want to achieve. We have the page that is scrolling. Active states are set when I scroll or when I click. That's about it. Our one-pager with sticky header in Axure. If you have comments or questions, write below or send me a mail at post@thomasjakstedt.de. If you have ideas for even a simple solution or have ideas for future topics, please write me a mail or also put it in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to never miss a video in the future.